Hello and welcome back. Thank you very much for watching our video. Please like, share, and subscribe our videos to help us on our adventure. To start this video, I am installing the rails to the side of the cabin after our last sail when things started to fall all over the cabin. Here I'm simply trying new camera angles while I prepare the boat for our nice day sail. The rattling you hear in the background is the solar fan in the V-berth that the camera is sitting right next to. Unfortunately, I don't have any video of us sailing out to the location, but I do have a clip at the beach and on our way back. Unfortunately, I don't have an actual track of our path this day, but here is an image of our rough path from the marina in the bottom right to the beach that we anchored in front of in the middle left.
Here is this weekend's anchorage. We're not in a cove this time. We actually anchored right on a beach. So if we wanted to, we could swim over and swim in that beach, but the water is still too cold for that. We also have some neighbors, a nice looking houseboat with a small tender boat or a friend rafted up with them. Unfortunately, we are on the main channel of the lake right here. All boats going from one end to the other will pass right past here. As you see, there's one right there. And so we get some little bit of rockiness, but it's not that bad. We also have burgers on the grill. First time we've used the grill. Smells amazing. Can't wait to have those. So, up here at the nose of the boat, got vents open. It's a beautiful 75-degree day, moderate wind, not a cloud in the sky. It is beautiful as I am tripping on cables. I am not the best photographer. I'm not sure if that beach is private property or not. I will have to look that up and see. But this here is our first beach anchorage, and it is nice. I can't wait to be anchoring on a beach in the clear blue Bahamian waters. That's it for now.
The sailing videos that follow start at the very top of the screen around the corner and continue down to our marina.
Sun's right in my eyes looking at the wind indicator. Tacking over.
We have so many tacks in our path because Lake Allatoona is more like a snaky river than a round lake. This makes it very different than ocean sailing, where you set your sails once and travel for hours or even days without having to touch them. It's an added challenge the more we move into summer, the more boats there are on the lake. Almost everybody has a power boat of some sort, small or big, and I oftentimes have to time my tacking, like this right here, around when there's a boat passing by. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that boats under sail have right-of-way over power boats on lakes, but I still like to be courteous and not tack straight into a other boat's path and make them have to swerve out of the way.
What time is it? Yeah, you can. I don't know if she's going to be pissed off when she wakes up, though. Alright, I got to tack.
This becomes a choice of, do I wait for the boat to pass by and get closer to shore while waiting, or do I tack now and hope that I will pass behind him or the other boat will move?
Prepare to tack. Son of a bitch. Turn up, turn up. Prepare to tack. We're getting too close to land. Prepare to tack.
Also, at this part of the lake here, there is a small sailboat race going on. So now, during this section of my cruise, I am having to dodge not only power boats cruising by, but also small sailboats racing by.
Maybe.
For the most part, during this sail, there was no real conflict and everybody made it past just fine.
Yeah, they got a sailboat race going on. Alright, prepare to tack. Prepare to tack. Prepare to tack.
Okay.
Ching ching.
So now we move on to the rest of the weekend's activities, which includes beginning the repairs of the stern. You can see here that I have 3 sheets of BCX plywood on the table, and I am mixing resin to begin coating the plywood in resin for application of fiberglass. As you've seen in my previous video, I am using a West System epoxy-based resin, and I like this system because it has convenient pumps on the top where you simply pump equal number of times and there's your mix ratio. After mixing the epoxy, I simply dump the resin right in the middle of the board and begin spreading it around. I personally prefer to use plastic scrapers because I find them to be much more efficient than rollers or brushes that tend to soak up the resin and only gives you about half the resin on the wood. Scrapers, obviously, since there is no bristles or sponges to soak anything up, leaves practically all of the resin on the wood. And so here I'll speed up the footage for you, since it's the same process over and over. Mix the resin, pour it on the wood, and spread it around.
So I said earlier that not all of the epoxy will stay on the surface of the wood. Here's a perfect example. Looking at the shininess being where the epoxy is, you can see a number of places where the epoxy has soaked into the wood. Some places looks like I didn't even put anything on it, but I put a very clear and liberal coat of epoxy all over this thing. Yet you can see a number of places that it is now soaked in. I find it interesting actually that depending on the color of the grain actually changes how much it soaks in, like this spot right here in particular. The light grain color has soaked in the epoxy completely, whereas the dark grained areas do not soak in the epoxy quite so much. So after a few hours, I will come through, sand this, and put a second coat of epoxy on and let that soak in as well. So while I wait for the epoxy to soak in and cure on the first layer of wood, I can work on sanding down and refurbishing all of the teak parts for the boat. So since I forgot to restart the camera when I started sanding the pieces of teak, here's the first piece that I did. Sanded all the faces and edges. Everything is ready now for varnish. And here is my second piece, half done. Gotten this whole side and its back side done. I'm working this middle section. And then after that I will sand up the other side. You can really see the difference in the teak after sanding. This is with the coats of varnish on it, and this is after it has been sanded and prepared. I don't know if they used a stain type varnish to make it this color, but the teak that I've normally seen in videos and such is a much lighter color than this. So this was either used with a stain varnish or it's just very weathered. So I'm hoping that the teak comes out with a more natural color with the varnish that I put on it later. Second piece of teak ready for varnishing.
The beauty of video editing is that you don't have to sit here and watch the many hours of hand sanding it took to sand these parts.
I said earlier that in a few hours I would come and put a second layer of epoxy onto the wood, but seeing as I am wanting it to soak into the grain as much as possible, I'm not going to do that. It is ready for a second coat now, but you can still see here, as I said earlier, that the epoxy is soaking into the grain of the wood very nicely, and I really do want that in order to seal up the pores of the wood and give it a nice long life, and also to ensure that the fiberglass that goes on after this will stick to the epoxy and wood very well rather than peel off if you put it on without allowing the epoxy to soak into the wood. So I'm actually going to allow this to cure for the full time, about 1 to 2 days, and then I will come back and sand it and then put a second layer of epoxy on top of that, and I will continue that process until none of this right here is happening. When the epoxy stops soaking into the wood and stays as a full coat of epoxy on top, that's when the wood is done, and I will sand it and put one more coat on top of that, and then sand it again and lay the fiberglass on and sandwich the fiberglass in between the panels of wood. So I put the boards on the table and I put one layer of epoxy on them.
Resin.
Epoxy resin, yes, same thing.
Okay.
And right now I'm letting it soak in. If you look at the shininess of it, you'll see that there's a lot of places that have already soaked in, especially around the edges.
Okay, yeah, right here.
Uh-huh. So what we want is we want the resin to soak into the wood so that it seals the wood.
Okay.
And it gives it a much stronger bond if you let it soak in. If you put the fiberglass straight down on bare wood and try to apply the epoxy resin onto that, you're going to find that very little of the resin stays in the fiberglass because it gets soaked into the wood, or you're going to have a very poor bond from the fiberglass to the wood, and the fiberglass is likely to peel off real easily. So I've put down one coat and you'll see that a lot of it has already soaked in, so I'm going to let it sit here for a day or two and then sand it and put down a second coat. Usually about 2 or 3 coats should fill it up and it should stop soaking in. Once it stops soaking in, then I'll sand it again and apply the fiberglass. That's the plan with this. So while waiting on that to cure, I came over here and started sanding some of the teak, actually all the teak that we have here. And I don't know where half of these parts go, but we'll figure that out later. But they look very nice, all sanded down. Here is an example. That is what it looks like sanded, and that is what it looks like unsanded. Now we will put varnish back onto this after cleaning it up, but some of the pieces are very, very dark. I mean, that's not even a good example. There's some pieces that were way darker than this, and I'm wondering if they used a stain rather than a varnish. Or either that or a staining varnish. I don't know if they make such a thing, but either way, it looked terrible. And so by doing this, gets all the stain or varnish off, and we get nice fresh coats. It should look very nice and pretty after we get done with that. So that is what I have been doing all day.
Okay.